Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Worrell, General Manager of PACE Care. Welcome to today's webinar in which we focus our attention on workers' compensation. In opening, I'll just like to acknowledge the traditional lands on which we all meet today and to pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Just touch on a few housekeeping matters before we get started. As is usual with these webinars, all questions will be answered towards the end of the presentation. The Q&A will be facilitated again today by Emily Miller of Brilliant Logic. Pre-submitted questions have been given to Adam and Teegan, who will do their best to address as many as possible in today's webinar. You can submit additional questions during the webinar using the Q&A function at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Slides, videos, and of the webinar and contact details will be sent to you at the end of the webinar. The provision of care services, it's labour intensive, resulting in the cost of wages and salaries being the largest expense incurred by care providers. And no matter the amount of training and education or how rigorous the application of workplace safety procedures, unfortunately, injuries still occur and the costs of workplace health and safety are very significant. Our keynote speakers for today are Bryce and Teegan Fleming from Saunders Insurance Brokers. Bryce heads up the policy and premium team, and as policy service manager, his customer-centric approach and experience in underwriting enables him to assist clients with managing challenges of a work compensation program and to ensure accuracy in premium costing and forecasting. And Teegan is a senior claims executive with a wealth of knowledge and experience in case management, quality assurance and business improvement that she's developed over 19 years specialising in workers' compensation. Today, together, Bryce and Teegan will provide a grassroots understanding of what workers' compensation is, how it works, give us an update on the current insurance environment, and some insights on effectively managing your claims and minimising your premiums. Welcome, Bryce. Welcome, Teegan.
Thanks, Greg. All right, well, thank you everybody for having us today. I'll run this slideshow and Teegan and I will take turns in presenting. So as Greg says, so what we'll essentially cover off today is what is workers' compensation. Teegan and I will both provide a scheme update in terms of claims update and a premium update. We'll also be supplying some industry trends that are specific to the aged care, residential care sector. We'll go through what impacts premium and how. We'll have a chat around injury prevention, and we'll also talk about some claims management strategies. Okay, just a photo of Teegan and I if anyone was interested. So what is workers' compensation? So as Greg said before, you know, the biggest bill that a business will ever have is your wages roll. But for a lot of businesses, the second biggest bill is their workers' compensation. So essentially, workers' comp is a form of insurance. It protects your employees if they're injured at work or become sick due to their work. So workers' compensation payments include to employees' wages while they're not fit for work, medical expenses and rehab, and if an employee is injured while travelling for the purpose of work, they may be able to lodge a claim. So in that instance, it would be if your employees are going from site to site, they still would be covered whilst they are travelling. And for compensation to apply, there must be a real and substantial connection between employment and an accident or injury. So that's a real key there, that we need to be able to find out that there is a substantial connection between work and the injury. If an employee is injured in a motor vehicle accident, travelling between their workplace and home, They also may be entitled to workers' compensation under the compulsory third-party scheme as well. So employees in each state or territory are required to take out workers' compensation to cover either themselves and or their employees. So every state and territory has a different premium and pricing model, and the benefits available for injured workers will vary. So in New South Wales, iCare is the insurer who basically manages all workers' compensation policies. In Victoria, we have WorkSafe. Queensland, we have WorkCover. And South Australia, we have Return to Work South Australia. In Tasmania, ACT, WA, and the Northern Territory, we have what they're called risk states. So insurers actually underwrite their own risk there and set rates accordingly to, I guess, the appetite for the industry that they're about to insure. Whereas in the other states, it's all government run, so rates are set by government and claims are just managed by scheme agents. I'll just hand over to Teegan now, who will give you a scheme update in regards to claims.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's staying safe. I'm just going to start with giving a bit of an overview of some of the changes that have happened in the scheme over the last few years. The most significant change that's probably happened in 2018 when the Workers' Compensation Scheme changed, making EML the sole provider for managing workers' compensation claims. So there was initially 5 claims agents that managed claims, and the entire portfolio was given to EML to manage, with Allianz and GIO given a short-term contract to manage the runoff. Now, that obviously caused a lot of uproar. There was lots of backlash from employer groups around removing employer choice. However, that's the way that they felt was the best way to manage the scheme moving forward. What the consequence of that was that the scheme, instead of running in at a profit, they started going into deficit. So then some further changes came in 2020, where iCare rolled out what they called the authorised provider model. So this enabled large employers to select and have choice around the claims manager that managed their workers' compensation claim. So the insurers that then came into the scheme, Allianz continued to manage the runoff, but were also now managing the authorised provider model, EML, GIO, and QBE. So that was from 2020, but is limited to large employers. There has been a lot of talk around further changes coming, and we're expecting that market will open up even more over the next year or two. Initially, there was a tender process that was scheduled for earlier this year, which has been postponed, and I'm hearing that that tender process will go ahead in November. So we don't know what that looks like, but I'm certain that we will find out in the next sort of year or so. There'll be more changes. It's looking like they'll probably open it up further, maybe reducing the base tariff premium for large employers to a lower amount to allow employer choice or further employer choice. In 2018, when they changed the model in terms of claims management providers, they also completely changed their claims management model. And what happened was they took a lot of the decision rights away from the claims management, and those decision rights then fell with iCare. So things like disputing liability, referring for independent medical assessments, all of those had to be reviewed and approved by iCare. Part of that was the introduction of the medical support panel, which is a panel of independent doctors that would review a case prior to approval being given for an independent assessment. So this caused all sorts of problems in terms of the ability of the claims agents to just refer off for an independent assessment. And a lot of the times the medical support panel would make recommendations around, instead of referring for an independent assessment, to go back and get further information from treating providers. So the idea behind the MSP was to reduce the time it takes in terms of getting an independent assessment if it wasn't really needed. However, with the introduction of the MSP, it was much more difficult for claims agents to do referrals for independent assessments, which was impacting on the ability to dispute claims if that was appropriate. So in December 2020, they made some further changes where it was no longer compulsory to send it off to the MSP before referring for an independent medical assessment. So the MSP still exists and it definitely has a place, and the claims agent utilize MSP if they need some advice regarding future strategies on claims, or if some information's not clear, but they're not restricted around referring for independent medical assessments because it has to go to the MSP first. So that's just a quick overview of some of the changes that have happened in a claims space over the last couple of years.
Thanks, Teegan. Just in regards to a scheme update with a policy. So a lot of you may have noticed over the course of your last couple of renewals that your premiums have been increasing. That's in accordance with iCare's change around premium rate adjustments. So the premium rate adjustment from iCare has increased from about 1.4% of wages to about 1.44% of wages for policy for the 21-22 period, which has actually resulted in an increase of premium of around 2.9% across the scheme. There's a couple of factors, I guess, that are contributing to this increase. There's been, I guess, a lot more claims that have been lodged, and also iCare's WIC rates, so the industry classification rates that iCare set each renewal, have actually been increasing. So your premiums are determined by how much you pay in annual wages and the industry classification that has been applied to your policy. So this year we'll see half of all businesses will see an increase and half of them won't see an increase. But it also means that some individual premiums will have an increase in their premium greater than scheme average. So essentially what that means is that the scheme average is increased by about 2.9%. But there are varying factors that could relate to an increase greater than that, and that's an increase in wages, if your rate has gone up over 2.9%, and also your claims history as well. And if your premium has if your business has a premium that's experience rated, which I'm assuming most of you would, the amount that you pay is impacted by your claims performance. So anybody with a basic tariff premium, which is your wages times your rate over $30,000, is a claims impacted premium. So any of your claims performance over the past 3 years will impact your premium. I'll just hand over to Teegan now, who will give an update on some industry trends.
Thanks, Bryce. So the next few slides provide some data around the industry trends and the industries that are covered. It covers accommodation for aged care, nursing homes, residential care services, and non-residential care services. So this graph looks at the volume of claims per 1,000 employees for the industry. So if you have a look, pretty stable, started to reduce around 2018, but the trend seems to be bucked in 2019. So hopefully we see a steady trend reduction in the trend. This one looks at the average days off work. So as you can see, it's steadily reducing, which is great news. So even though the volume of claims has been pretty stable, the average days someone's having off work on workers' compensation is reducing. the worker's age at injury. So if you have a look, by far, the largest category is the 46 to 60-year-old, which is probably unique to this industry in that there is an aging workforce, and we have people around that age. A lot of the injuries relate to aggravations of pre-existing conditions like degenerative conditions, particularly around knees, shoulders, backs, that sort of thing. So that's not surprising at all. With a small volume in the 0 to 19 category as well. Claim duration or closed claims. So if you have a look at that, in the 0 to 13 weeks, 32.2% of claims are closed in that period, which is great news. We don't like to see long-term claims, but then if you have a look at the other end, 3.3% of claims are closed greater than 104 weeks from the date of injury. This shows the top 10 injury categories. So like I mentioned before, in this industry, we see a lot of meniscal tears, rotator cuff tears in the shoulders. That would account for the 51.1% category down the bottom. And then there's varying other categories there as well.
So I'll just jump in there, Teegan, as well. I guess this is extremely important, these industry categories, that when you're looking at the roles, you know, of any aged care facility or residential care home, I guess it's really pertinent to see that a lot of the injuries are musculoskeletal, and then, you know, your traumatic joint, ligament, and muscle tendon injuries. So a lot of the injuries are actually focused around, you know, those bending, you know, pushing, pulling, twisting, lifting. So it shows that if you are, I guess, not focused on improving, I guess, your processes, that those injuries are going to continue to occur. And I guess a really important one as well is that 6% of claims now are actually mental health claims. They are certainly increasing every time we're getting this data, that mental health aspect of a claim is increasing every time we get this data.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting that those mental health claims, that's primary psychological claims. So a lot of the physical injuries, we still see secondary psychological claims. So mental health and psych injuries are definitely much more prominent than what they have been in the past. And this slide shows the bodily location. So like I mentioned before, upper limbs, so shoulders, and again, as Bryce mentioned, relating to manual handling, lifting clients, moving clients, showering clients. That's where we see the shoulders, the knees, the backs.
All right, thank you, Teegan. So I'll just give a bit of an update around what impacts premium and how. So there's three main components that impact a workers' compensation premium. So your wages, which includes your superannuation, your business activity, and your claims cost for those with a basic tariff premium over $30,000. For policies with a basic tariff premium over $30,000, individual claims performance is actually compared to the scheme. So in essence, what that means is that when iCare look at what your claims history is and how you compare to the scheme, they're also comparing you to people that are sitting in offices, people that are on construction sites. So in a way, it's not you're not actually being compared to your own industry. You're being compared to the scheme as a whole. And essentially what iCare does is they will take 3 years of claims history, work out then whether you have a loading or a discount on your premium, and charge your premium accordingly to that. Every policy also has a dust disease levy component to their policy, which is used as a contribution to the Dust Diseases Board to pay out dust-related injuries, so asbestosis, as an example, will be paid out through that fund. But essentially, I guess the main components of your premium are the wages, your business activity, and your claims costs. When you're certainly focusing on your business activity, there are certain activities within the aged care sector that you should be applying your wages to. You've got accommodation for the aged, you've got nursing homes, you've got home care services, you've got non-residential care services. So if you have any questions around whether you are allocating your wages under the correct rates, certainly happy to field any questions around that at the end. And I just had to put a slide in around what the historical average premium rates are. This is generally a pretty, probably the better term for it, but a pretty controversial slide when it comes to the premium rates. Whilst iCare has published some data that says that iCare premium rates are certainly coming down over the last 7 or 8 years, I know that premiums historically have been going up. And there are a couple of factors for that. I think that certainly iCare decisions around scheme agents has certainly impacted premium through claims management. And I know Teegan will go into a little bit of that. But certainly an increase in wages as well in the sector has increased premiums. But the main contributing factor to premiums is your claims costs. So certainly having them managed properly is a key component of controlling any workers' compensation premium.
Okay, so let's talk injury prevention. Obviously, if there's a big focus on injury prevention, then that's going to save your business a lot of money in terms of managing workers' compensation claims. So how can you increase your focus on injury prevention? It's very important that you have effective work health and safety systems, but not only have effective work health and safety systems, that you have an awareness in your business around what those systems and procedures are, and creating a safety culture in your work environment. It's important to have staff engagement in the work health and safety processes and systems, and holding staff accountable for their own work health and safety and the work health and safety of their teammates or work colleagues. You can do that by encouraging employees to report and proactively managing incidents and near misses, and doing thorough investigations and corrective actions for those near misses to mitigate future risk. One of the other things I'll mention around injury prevention, and because the mental health claims are so prominent these days, is that if you're doing any type of performance management, that you have clear policies and procedures around that process, and that will help if a workers' comp claim's managed in terms of defending that claim and for the insurer to determine liability on those. Claims management strategies. So it's not rocket science here, but there's been extensive research that shows that if the longer someone gets back to work initially, the longer their overall recovery is. And we see it often. People that have an extensive amount of time off initially, or there's delays in getting them back to work, they start new routines, things like they might take their children out of childcare and they look after their children in the morning and in the afternoon, and those habits are really hard to break. Once someone gets in a new routine, it's much more difficult to get them back to work. It's also really important for injured people to stay active outside of their work to make sure that they maximise their potential recovery.
And I'll just add something on that as well. Sorry, Teegan. I know it isn't, I guess, as common in this industry, but I liken Teegan's comment around people being at home and getting into routine, how hard it is to get them back to the office. I liken it to people that are working from home at the moment. Businesses, after the first sort of lockdown, really struggled to get workers coming back into the office. And it's exactly the same for an injury. Once someone gets home and they're home for an extended period of time, we find it really, really hard to get them back to, their pre-injury duties, because what's the benefit of them going back to the office or going back to your facility? They get paid by the insurer. So there's no real, I guess, incentive for them to return. So that's why that constant contact with your injured workers is so important. Essentially, what we tell our clients is that they need to be playing the good cop routine, and let your insurance broker or your conversations with the insurer be the bad cop routine. Let your insurer do a lot of the work, let your broker do a lot of the work. But as an employer, you need to be shown being quite supportive of your workers, because that early intervention, that early contact with them is just so important to making sure that that claim comes back, that claim is closed as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Bryce. It's also really important that claims are notified early. So then the appropriate resources can be put in place in terms of rehab, or the insurer can provide advice, or broker in our instance, around the best way to manage that claim initially. So what are some of the benefits to your business of early intervention and supporting recovery at work? So the biggest one would be the financial impact the claims have on your premium. But not only that, you'll be able to maintain good employer-employee relationships. You'll be able to demonstrate to the rest of the workforce that you're supportive of your employees and you value your employees. You'll be able to retain staff, so there won't be costs around retraining new staff, upskilling or hiring costs, and you'll be complying with your legislative obligations. So here's just some practical steps that employers can take to support workers to recover at work. And like Bryce mentioned before, the critical action that you guys can take is contacting your worker and maintaining that regular contact so they feel supported and valued. We know from our experience that workers that feel supported and valued return to work much earlier than people that that have workers' compensation claims where the employer-employee relationship has broken down. So I cannot stress that enough to you. Make early contact with your worker. Like Bryce mentioned, even if you don't believe it's a legitimate claim, you guys provide support and let the worker know that they are valued, and let the insurer play the bad cop. In the background, the investigations and information gathering can happen, but on the face of it, you need to be supportive and make them feel supported and valued. One of the other key elements to supporting recovery at work is providing suitable employment. So you do have an obligation as an employer to provide suitable duties for a worker when they're injured, if that's feasible for your business. That will get the worker back into the workplace, back into a working routine, and will minimise the volume of time that they have off work. So what do you do if you believe the claim isn't a genuine claim, or you have some concerns regarding liability? Our advice to our clients is contact us as soon as possible. There is a number of different scenarios, and each claim needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. But essentially, you need to provide as much information as possible if you do not believe it's a valid claim. So a lot of the psychological claims that we see, employers do not believe that they're legitimate claims. And a number of those are as a result of performance management. So there's part of the Act where psychological claims are not compensable if it's related to performance management or disciplinary action, and if the employer has acted reasonably. So in that instance, it's important to gather the information to show that you as an employer have taken the reasonable actions in that process. One of the other things we've seen psychological claims is there may be allegations made by a worker around bullying and harassment. If that's the case, then we would need the employer to provide as much information to defend those claims. So there's an allegation that's made and you don't believe that that is the truth, then you need to provide evidence to support that it isn't, that actually did not happen. There's other examples where it might be a knee injury and you have evidence that this person did that injury on the weekend when they were doing sport. If that's the case, you need to provide evidence to support that, to send through to the insurer. So it might be in the form of a witness statement, the person that saw them injure their knee playing sport or football or whatever, and that would support it didn't occur at work and help the insurer to make a liability decision. It's also really important that regardless of whether you believe the claim is a legitimate claim or not, you continue to support the worker with return to work, because that will reduce the wage component and the premium impact until a liability decision is made. So the insurer has 7 days from the time they receive a claim to make a provisional liability decision. So it's very, very important that you get all the information you can on lodgement. Some employers choose to hold off a little bit on lodgement to be able to gather all the information and get their ducks in the row before they lodge the claim. Now, you have an obligation to notify the insurer within 5 days, and the consequences of that is that if it's a wage loss claim, you're incurring excess to the value of the first week's wages. Now, some employers are happy to take that penalty to try and get the information that they can to avoid the claim being provisionally accepted within that 7 days. But if that is the case, I would suggest that you give us a call and ask us for some advice regarding that.
All right, Emily, are you going to filter through some questions that we have?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a few here ready to go. So first one, what if I can't find duties for an injured worker?
I'll answer that one, Emily. So you have a legal obligation to provide suitable duties. It's not feasible for all companies. For example, it might be a truck driving company and they only have roles in truck driving. There's no administration, there's nothing like that. So if it's not feasible or possible for you as a company to provide those duties, then there won't be any consequences as a result of that, apart from the impact it can have on your premium. So wages impact, and the longer someone is off work, obviously the higher the claims cost, and then that will have an impact on your premium. What can happen if you're having trouble identifying suitable duties? The insurer, or you can request that the insurer make a referral off to an occupational rehab provider who will come in and assess the workplace and try and identify suitable duties. It's always in the best interests of everyone to provide suitable duties if possible.
Thank you. And another question that was pre-submitted, are there any similarities between the types of injuries incurred in home care versus residential care?
The industry trends that we went through didn't split up those two categories. However, in my experience, the injuries are very, very similar. So you would think that there would be a higher volume of injuries in home care versus residential care, because residential care have the lifting equipment and to help with heavy manual tasks, but that hasn't been my experience. I think the volume is very similar, whether it's home care or residential care.
Thanks, Teegan. Another one that was pre-submitted. If I'm unhappy with my current provider, can I change, and is it a complicated process?
It's not a complicated process. It's quite an easy process. There's a form that you need to fill out. You can only change at renewal time, so you can't midway through that period change. And you can only change currently if you have a base tariff premium over $500,000. So like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we are expecting that to change sometime down the track. But currently, if your base tariff premium is below 500,000, you can't change.
Okay, and we've had a question come through from an attendee. Being we have an aging workforce, some over 65, how do we differentiate wear and tear on job to on-job injuries?
That's the $1 million question, I guess, and probably some of the struggles we see every day. Like, there's ways that you can avoid it in terms of looking at pre-employment medicals before you hire people, but a lot of these employees have been with the same company for many, many years. So what happens is when the claim is lodged with the insurer, if there's concerns regarding underlying conditions and pre-existing conditions, it's usually visible in the scans, then they will need to, and we will ask them to investigate through getting information from the treating doctors, or in a lot of cases referring for an independent assessment to differentiate between what is pre-existing and what is an aggravation. So under the workers' comp legislation, if a pre-existing condition is aggravated by work, then the workplace is liable for that aggravation.
Thanks, Teegan. And we have another question that was submitted earlier. What can I do if I believe I've declared my wages under the incorrect classification?
Thanks, Emily. In terms of wages, so if you believe that you have declared wages incorrectly under different classifications, you certainly can contact either your insurance broker in the first instance, but failing, if you don't have an insurance broker, you can certainly contact iCare's underwriting and premiums team. I guess where this probably would come up more often than not is when you have multiple classifications applied to your policy. A lot of the times when we see, we see new clients who have multiple classifications, they don't know where to declare their administration wages. So when you have multiple classifications against the premium, you should be declaring your administration wages under the lowest rate that has been applied to your premium. But in terms of where you would go to have those changed, as I said, first instance, I would be going and seeing your insurance broker, but second to that, you're going to see iCare. And if you believe that you may have been classified incorrectly, we actually have the ability, as much as iCare might tell you that you don't, you have the ability to go back and look at the last 4 years' premiums and have them reviewed so that you are classified under the correct classification. And you also have the ability to go back and amend your wages at any point. So if you've over-declared wages in 2015, you can go back and ask iCare to review them for you.
Thanks, Bryce. I think that's all the questions that we've had submitted. Unless anybody has any more they want to submit through the Q&A. Oh, there's one just popped through now. For home care services, a home care assistant may attend to a customer's residence on their own. An investigation or fact-finding or evidence may compromise the relationship we have with the customer. Any other tips on how we can dispute liability in this scenario?
Sorry, Emily, can you repeat that one for me, please?
Yeah, for sure. For home care services, a home care assistant may attend to a customer's residence on their own. An investigation or fact-finding or any evidence may compromise the relationship we have with the customer. Any other tips on how we can dispute liability in this scenario?
I think just gathering as much information as you can in terms of the circumstances around how that happened. The claim will be lodged against your policy, so it shouldn't impact too much on the customer relationship, apart from if that person's away from work, then getting someone different in.
Okay, thank you, Teegan.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that as well. I think if part of that question is around sort of the investigation in terms of going into a client's home, I guess the key to that would be to be gathering before you're actually employing people in homes. So if you can provide as much information from the initial sort of setup from a home care services perspective, it might sort of stop you needing to do an investigation in your clients' homes, which would then obviously alleviate that issue of the relationship between you and that home care.
Okay, thanks, Bryce. Okay, we've run out of time for any additional questions. If you do have any more questions that you'd like to submit, you can send them through to info@pacecare.com.au, and we'll be able to send you a summary of questions that were submitted, as well as the slides and a recording of the webinar, so you can refer back to it. But now I'll hand over to Greg from PACE, who will just close off for us.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks to Teegan and to Bryce for your presentation, and for so generously sharing your time and your knowledge and your ideas with us today. And again, Emily, thank you for your coordination and directing of today's webinar. And thanks to you attendees for your questions. As was just mentioned by Emily, please do send any additional questions that may come up that you think of afterwards. And we'll pass those on for some responses and get them all out to you, along with the slides and the video of today's presentation. So we hope that once again you've found it an informative and insightful webinar, and encourage you to keep an eye out in your inbox for notifications of future PACE webinars. And if you'd like to learn more about how PACE may be able to assist you in your organisations, please feel free to contact myself, Greg Worrell, through those contact details provided and available on our LinkedIn page and on our website. Until next time, take care, be safe, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.